Okay, welcome to video 3. This is our final video for this unit, so you should be preparing for your test, which is coming up in the very near future. So, today the U.S. is going to war. At the beginning of World War I, the U.S. was not getting involved at all. President Woodrow Wilson declared that the United States would remain neutral during the war and that the issues were strictly a European affair. We managed to stay neutral by supplying both sides, the Triple Alliance and the Triple Entente, with supplies like food, raw materials, and weapons. Great Britain has a long history of trade blockades. They used their powerful navy to block off ports so that trading couldn't occur. And this is exactly what happened in World War I. By 1915, German imports had gone down 55%. So that means that not as many goods and materials were coming out of the country. Now, remember, the U.S. remained neutral by trading and supplying both sides. But when the blockade occurred, the United States had no choice then but to trade with the Allies. Germany reacted by intensifying submarine warfare that had been going on in the North Sea and in the Atlantic Ocean. They used submarines to bomb ships that had contraband or illegal items, specifically war supplies that were being shipped from a neutral nation to an enemy nation. In response to the blockade, Germany had declared that they would be using their submarines to sink without any sort of warning any ship that was found in the waters around Great Britain. On May 7, 1915, the Lusitania, which was a British passenger ship, sunk off the coast of Ireland by a German U-boat. 1,200 passengers died, including 128 American citizens. Germany never apologized and claimed that the Lusitania was carrying ammunition, which they were. Americans were outraged, to say the least. After all, we were still a neutral country. Wilson sent a strong protest to Germany, and after 2 more attacks, Germany finally agreed to stop torpedoing neutral and passenger ships. Germany was desperate for an advantage over the Allies, and in 1917 they returned to unrestricted submarine warfare. As if sinking 4 more American merchant ships and pushing America closer to war weren't enough, there was the issue of the Zimmermann Telegraph. In February of 1917, Germany's Foreign Secretary Arthur Zimmermann sent a telegram to Mexican officials stating that Germany would help Mexico, quote-unquote, reconquer the land that they had lost to the United States if Mexico would become allies with Germany. The U.S. managed to intercept and decode the telegram, and on April 5, 1917, President Wilson asked Congress to declare war on Germany in order to make the world safe for democracy. You must know this phrase. You must know that Woodrow Wilson wanted to make the world safe for democracy. Of course, Congress approved his request, and the U.S. entered the war. Immediately, the U.S. began shipping supplies to Great Britain. Now, U.S. troops arrived in massive numbers in 1918. This is a photo of American troops as they were arriving in England. So now the major allies consisted of Great Britain, France, Italy, Canada, and the United States. But in 1917, Bolshevik revolutionaries in Russia overthrew Tsar Nicholas, and we'll discuss this more in depth in our next unit. But remember the Battle of Tannenberg? So the Russians took a massive blow to their army when they were defeated. Now remember that this is where 90,000 men were taken prisoner. Russia suffered major losses during World War I, and it was due to their lack of industrialization, not having enough food, as well as poor leadership. Vladimir Lenin ends up taking over, he took over control of Russia once Tsar Nicholas had been forced to abdicate. We'll certainly talk more about him later as well. But in March of 1918, the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, oh my goodness, the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk occurred. And in this treaty, Russia accepts extremely harsh terms from Germany in order to get out of the war. Russia ended up losing 1/4 of their land. After the treaty was signed and Russia had left the war, Germany pulled all of their troops that had been fighting on the Eastern Front to the Western Front. Once again, Germany had Paris in its sights. Because remember that if you conquer a country's capital city, then you can control the entire country. Germany makes it all the way back to the Marne River again, but a counterattack by the Allies managed to push them all the way back to the German border. After this setback, of course, German morale is low. Their troops are tired, and they aren't advancing as quickly or as easily as they had hoped. Allied troops, however, have high morale because not only are they fending off the Germans, but also because they have fresh American troops to come in and replace them every month. Now, in your notes, you have a small timeline to complete. The Central Powers begin to see that things are they're just not going the way that they wanted them to. On September 30th, 1918, Bulgaria surrendered. 1 month later, on October 30th, 1918, the Turks from the Ottoman Empire asked for peace, and just days later, on November 4th, 1918, the Austro-Hungarian Empire broke up and stopped fighting in order to form their own independent governments. Of the Triple Entente powers, Germany was the only one left. Eventually, German soldiers began to mutiny or to retaliate against the government and refuse to fight. Kaiser Wilhelm was forced to abdicate or give up the throne. On November 11, 1918, Germany signed an armistice. Now, this is known as Armistice Days, and if you have a paper calendar somewhere in your house, take a look at November 11th. It's typically still printed on calendars as Armistice Day. So now what? Well, the Paris Peace Conference was held in Paris, January of 1919. There were 32 nations that sent delegates to go figure out what now. Russia and Germany did not send delegates. There were major players, though, and they were called the Big Four. And they were David Lloyd George, Prime Minister of Great Britain, Vittorio Orlando, Prime Minister of Italy, Georges Clemenceau, who was Prime Minister of France, and Woodrow Wilson, who was President of the United States. Wilson had this fantastic plan that he thought was an ideal peace plan, and he called that 14 points. Now, here are just a few of the points from his plan. There could be no secret treaties. There must be freedom of the seas. Self-determination had to be a thing, so people had to be able to decide for themselves which government they wanted to live under. And finally, there should be a League of Nations. This general association of nations would protect great and small nations alike, and this really showed Wilson hope for a way to peacefully negotiate solutions to world conflicts. That World War I would be the last war of its kind, which is why it was often referred to as the war to end all wars, or the Great War. While this all sounds incredibly wonderful, the differences the Big Four had with each other finally led to the Treaty of Versailles. And we're going to look at 4 of the 3 items from the Treaty of Versailles. So we're going to look at the punishment of Germany, mandates, and the League of Nations. So the Treaty of Versailles was between Germany and the Allied powers and was signed on June 28, 1919, exactly 5 years since the spark that started the whole war, the assassination of Franz Ferdinand. Now, Germany had to do several things. First, Germany had to accept responsibility for the war. They also had to pay reparations, 132 billion gold marks, which at that time was about 33 billion US dollars. They had to pay this in reparations to cover civilian damage caused during the war. Germany finally paid this amount off on October 3rd, 2010. So it took them a long time to pay off this reparation. So remember Alsace-and-Lorraine? Yeah, Germany lost that territory as well. It went back to France. Germany also lost their military strength. It was restricted greatly. Germany lost land to reestablish Poland, and finally, they had to set up a demilitarized zone along the border of France and Belgium. Now, a mandate system was also set up in the Middle East. Germany's going to lose control of the colonies that they had there, of the areas that they were in control in. So France now controlled Syria and Lebanon, and Great Britain controlled Iraq, Transjordan, and Palestine. Now, I briefly talked about the League of Nations earlier. It was President Woodrow Wilson's grand idea, but overall, the League of Nations was extremely weak because it had no power to enforce any of the decisions that they made. Because of this weakness, Congress would not approve it, and therefore the United States was not a member of the League of Nations. So, by the end of World War I, we see the end of the Ottoman Empire, the end of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the German Empire, and the Russian Empire. In their places, we see where new countries are going to be formed or were formed, including Austria, Hungary, Poland, Yugoslavia, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. So, what did the war truly cost? Well, it cost 9 million lives, 21 million were wounded, and monetarily speaking, it cost over $338 billion. Okay, so a lot of people were impacted by this war. You know that they were hoping that this would be the last war ever, the war to end all wars, the Great War. It wasn't, we know that, but people were hopeful at this point in time. So make sure that you are preparing everything for your test, and I will see you next class.